All right. Brett, thank you for jumping on today with the America Offline podcast. Let's jump right on into it. Brett, we haven't connected too much, so why don't you give myself and the listeners a little bit of background about yourself, what you're up to nowadays, and sort of your path to working with athletes and mindfulness and all the stuff that you are doing.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a clinical psychologist. I was trained with a mindset and a purpose and a focus on the way that our body and our minds interact when it comes to medical conditions and the influence of stress, both daily stress and the major stressors that we have in our lives. And I got into that because I had some injuries when I was playing baseball at LSU as a player. Struggled with my own belief, kind of maybe a little bit of imposter syndrome type of stuff where I didn't know if I was good enough to play at the level I wanted to play at. It wasn't until I turned to the mental side and focused on an approach for myself did I really understand why and what, and that's kind of what got me into psychology. I did my training. I finished my training. We have essentially like a 1-year residency for clinicians. And I did that at Brown Medical School, where I continued to work in the medical settings. And then, I knew I wanted to work with athletes. I knew I wasn't prepared. I knew I needed a lot more seasoning. So I worked in the pharmaceutical spectrum for about 8 years doing medical strategy development, team execution, team building, and working across the settings like that while I kind of worked on my own just a little bit and had the opportunity to work and consult with people. And about 8, 9 years ago, the business was booming and had the opportunity to go out on my own. And I founded the Mind Side, which is really me, where it's just my practice where I do my work with my athletes and my corporate leaders and stuff like that. And business has just been great and booming. So I just focus on the perspectives that help me as an athlete and help athletes find their true pathway to success.
That's awesome. So, Brett, so you've been working with athletes for about a decade now, is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. So, we're in it's 2019 right now, and then we go back to 2009. That was about 2 years after the smartphone was released in 2012. Sort of hit 50% of adoption of at least Americans that had a smartphone. But I'm sort of curious. I want to get into sort of how things have changed for athletes, in your opinion, in the last decade. What are some of the differences that you're seeing as far as how kids are struggling today or not struggling compared to how it used to be?
Well, I think we got to always look at the technological innovations as having benefits and also having risks. So if I look at the benefits, we know so much more about performance optimization in the strength and conditioning world. We're so much more connected than we've ever been. We can reach across oceans and have real-time conversations in social media platforms. We can analyze and statistically evaluate player performance and looking at markers of fatigue or sleep or different factors like that and have it in real-time data. I know like at the University of Alabama, our football players are always on technological assessment tools, measuring, body velocity and speed and explosion and things like that. And it's also positively impacted their rehabilitative process too, because new ways to rehab versus putting your foot in a old mop bucket. But at the flip side of that, over the last 20 years, 15 years, and 10 years, we've seen a gravitation to more and more of our athletes becoming, quote, celebrities before they've ever really achieved much. So the level of what we define as elite in our field is defined by how many followers you have and what's the audience that you can influence the greatest. So as a result, the need to perform is no longer just for the team, the family, and the organization around you, but for many times it's multiple layers. And it's kind of like a universe and the rings around a planet. Those rings just continue to drive deeper and deeper and further out. And I've watched in locker rooms, players coming off the court or the field, the first thing they do is they open up their phone to look at their social media. That obviously has a stress to it because you're not connected to them. And I can tell you, speaking with professional athletes, the burdens and the pressures to be a celebrity and to be accessible. And then the one time you don't give an interview, or the one time you don't give an autograph, the person goes out on social media and rips on you for being a jerk and being insensitive and not being there, when the fact is they may have been running late to another meeting and it wasn't their normal autograph time. So because everybody has a phone and everybody has an opinion, we now feel the need to constantly broadcast our opinions as if somebody really gives a shit. And so everybody has an opinion about everything now. And as long as you have people on social media agreeing with you, those opinions become validated. And so what happens is, I think psychologically, we're in a much greater world of validation than we are actually understanding. We're not into growing empathy and connection as we are validating our opinions. And I think the concepts such as microaggressions, concepts such as being offended and stuff like that have grown like wildfire from that same exact feeling of the need to be validated and heard versus the need to be understood. And I think for athletes, it's very much the same way. At the same time, I think the technological innovations of things like the Players Tribune and having players being able to control their story is much more powerful than it used to be in the past. People didn't get to control their story and their storyline. They get that now to some degree.
Right. So you mentioned the need to be understood, and that resonates with me as I've worked with a lot of teams. And you see a lot of times where, the coach is projecting onto the players and there's not a lot of buy-in there. What are some things, you've worked with a lot of teams, both in the corporate setting and then obviously athletic teams, but what are some ways to increase, you mentioned empathy, understanding, what are maybe some actionable ways or things that maybe even parents, coaches, teachers can do to increase the levels of connection with the teams and the groups and the classes that they're working with?
Well, I think the one thing we always look at is we are constantly looking at the interaction that our individuals have with us as a defining moment as their understanding of or their belief in us. So, for instance, you said about a coach projecting on them. That may be true on one day, but on the next day they may not be, and they may be giving freedom and flexibility for people to find their own way. And so I think what we've done is we've lost the ability of coaches to be able to provide, I would say, biased feedback, because any coach that's in a situation is going to give biased feedback. They're never going to give unbiased information. But we've lost the storyline of what it means to be a coach and a mentor. In the last 10 years, a mentor has become a friend. A mentor is not the person who challenges you. People will accept to be challenged, but only if they feel safe with the individual. And I don't know about you, and I'm not talking about feeling psychologically safe, like I feel like I'm at risk of having physical, sexual, or violent harm against myself. That's not what I'm talking about. And I'm not talking about verbal abuse either. But what I am talking about is some of the best mentors I've had, I still sometimes get a butterfly in my stomach when I walk in the room. I look at the major professor that I had in grad school for the last couple of years of my grad school experience. We didn't have the best relationship after graduation because there were some things that happened that I didn't appreciate and he didn't appreciate. We had different views of my career. That's fine. But I look back at the mentorship that he had with me. It was extremely demanding. It was extremely challenging. It was sometimes inconsistent. I've told a story of this before in the past, and I'll tell it again for this podcast. When you're a clinical student at the program I trained at, when you're going into your fourth year, you have to do what's called a comprehensive exam. And the comprehensive exam is where you do a full assessment of a patient without any supervision or support. Then you write a 25-page paper on the concepts and underlying illness behind the case that you're working up. And then you get assigned 3 clinical faculty to challenge you at any point. And they can ask you anything in the field of psychology that they deem necessary to evaluate your competencies. And so I did the exam, and I was okay in the exam until I got into an area where I really struggled. And I passed, but I had some harsh feedback from some professors that said, you kind of got yourself in an area where you didn't know how to get yourself out of. And they were right. It was on a statistical analysis test. I still remember the name of it. It was called the Cooter-Richardson 20. And it was something that I just made a mistake. I opened up my mouth, and one of the professors said, tell me more about the Cooter-Richardson 20, KR20. And I got myself stuck. Okay. So I go back to my professor, and it was my professor ran his program like medical students. He had senior students and all the way down. And I was going to be the senior student. So it was my job to present this case and this formulation to our incoming students and our incoming applicants. And it was a big moment. And I met with him the day before. I'd already passed the exam. I met with him the day before, and he looks through my material and he looks at it and he says, I'm really interested by the formulation of your diagnosis that you made here. the statistical analysis that you had on this personality test, that what we call the MMPI-2, is not consistent with your diagnosis and your formulation. Can you explain that? And I went, yeah, I just kind of looked at it as it was a kind of a mistake. And he was like, well, if that was the case, if you thought it was a mistake and it was an outlier, I would have failed you on the spot, because he was an expert on the MMPI. He could tell you what scores were endorsed on the 565 items without looking at the test. He said, and he kind of ripped on me for a little bit, and it was pretty harsh. I was at a place where I probably didn't need it. Now, deep down, he knew exactly what I did. I could wing things quite often and get away with it. He wasn't going to accept it. I went home that night. I had 2 kids by this time in my house. I went home. I stayed up all night, and I took home that test, and I took home this patient's assessment. And I went through and looked up all 565 items that she endorsed and figured out why the profile looked the way it did. I stayed up all night. I did not go to sleep that night. I came back. I had the presentation at 4:00 that day. Midway through the presentation, I put up the MMPI scale, and I put it up there, and his hand raises in the back and said, can you explain to me the discrepancy? And I said, Doc, whatever his name was, I said, Doc, I went back and I looked at every one of the items. I can tell you that 5 items were the ones that shifted the scale from where we are to what we think we should be. When I look at the validation of the scale, it looks like to me that probably these were misunderstood questions that were inconsistent with other checks throughout the scale. He put his hand down and said, that's a fantastic answer, and that's exactly what I was looking for. Okay, let me tell you why that's important. Because that was brutal feedback that he gave me. It was harsh. It was probably inappropriate in the point of he found something that he wanted to drill in on me, but he did it for a reason. My job was I didn't walk out of there and go and talk to my dean and felt that it was unfair. I didn't go home and tell everybody that I thought he was being mean to me and not being, but he was one of the greatest mentors I ever had. Okay. So when we look at great coaches and leaders, we have to have extremely high demands. We can't allow people to find the safe places in their head where it's comfortable. Growth takes friction. Growth takes fire. To grow, we have to have both of those. And if you don't have those, and if you don't have mentors, then what happens is we get in a comfort zone of mediocrity. And I don't want mediocrity. I want greatness. And so what we have to do as coaches and as leaders is to educate our attendees and our audience members so that they understand when they're sitting in the audience that they are going to be challenged at a level they've never been challenged before. And they have to give us that permission. Anything shy of that, the leader is failing them. But too many leaders are afraid to put themselves out there because of the retribution and the snapback that comes their way. And so until that happens, we're going to continue to allow people multiple levels outside of the true spheres of influence to influence the outcomes of what our youth are doing in sporting events and academics. You don't need to go negotiate with your teachers to change your grade. Earn a better grade.
Right.
Things like that.
Yeah. Wow. Well, there's a lot to unpack there, Brett. And I'll say that what you just mentioned, that whole scenario about leaders, it's necessary to be sort of demanding, and you need to hold your kids to a high level of accountability. The enemy is being average, right? You
Correct.
mentioned comfort zone of mediocrity. It speaks to me, and I think I could talk about it a little bit because I'm a little bit removed from it. But I actually coached high school ball this past season. I had since stepped down and resigned, but I was a pretty serious baseball coach. I was very demanding. I was hard to play for. And at least by some standards, the kids that were really serious about baseball and wanted to be, great, they loved me because I pushed them. I gave them, mental game stuff. I gave them challenges to take home with them, things to think about, morning weights, the whole deal. But the feedback I was getting from at least the majority was that I was just way too demanding. I was way too difficult. And at the end of the season, the general sentiment was, hey, this Coach David for a public school, he's just way too serious, way too demanding. This is supposed to be fun. He's just pushing them to, way too hard in this pressure-packed society that already exists. So, how do you navigate that? Or can you speak to that a little bit about, the general state of there being so much pressure, and at what point are we pushing them too hard? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, there is a belief, and I think pretty strongly that we are pushing our kids. The pressure and the standards that we perceive are at an all-time high. If you look at high schools now, when I was in high school and graduating in the spring of 1990, I went to an all boys Catholic school, had multiple national merit finalists, and they had very strong academic demands, but we didn't have anybody that made a perfect score on the SAT or the ACT. My daughter's high school this year had 4 or 5 people make a perfect score on
Right.
the ACT.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, what's shocking to me is the ACT has almost zero predictive power of collegiate success. Okay. It's a worthless test. All it is a test that creates a barrier that people must jump over. And so what we've done is we've trained people to value that a 29 or a 30 or a 36 on the ACT is actually predictive of anything. Okay. What it's most predictive of is that people can learn how to take a test. Now, why do most people who are smart are the ones that make in 36? Because they're really, really smart, that apply amazing study skills to learn to beat a test. And they beat it, not taken away from what they did. But what happens is the average discrimination of where we look at a normal curve, okay, the average is shifting, but it's really the perception of average is shifting. It's not really the average. So what happens is when somebody comes in with high demands, those that are afraid to put their heart and mind in the line and make the sacrifices would rather drag the boat versus row the boat. Okay. They're going to hold in with everything they can to prevent growth, because growth means more about themselves and their rejection of it than the growth of other teammates and other players from doing well. So you come in and in your first year, you rattle the cages, you shake up the status quo. More than likely, that was an underperforming or average team that always failed to live up to potential. And if I had to guess, probably every couple of years had some solid players that would raise up the level. Those players would leave, and then they would regress back to a standard average level.
Right.
Okay. Now, do they need to be yelled at, screamed at, whatever? That's coaching styles. Okay. One of the coaches that I knew loved me more than anything else yelled at me probably the most. Okay. And some of the coaches that were soft and gentle, I think were soft and gentle because they didn't put themselves out there. I'm not advocating one way or the other. But what I believe too is coaching in today's world has lost its role. Okay. We're in a coaching crisis in today's society. And the reason we are is that coaches used to have the power and the authority. Now, unfortunately, the 5 to 10% of bad apples have ruined it for everybody. Okay. If you were in a high school and you had a good baseball program, kids in middle school wanted to play for that high school. There was no guarantee they were going to make that squad. There was no guarantee they were going to play. There was no guarantee of anything, but that coach was there, developed players, made players better. The softball coach made females players better. The men's and women's basketball coaches made male and female players better. Okay. And you'd look at them and those kids would say, I want to go there. Well, what happened was now we have coaches that are not in control of their programs anymore. There's too many outside influences dictating who needs to play, when they need to play, make sure you do this, make sure you do that. And we've spent more time getting 17 travel uniforms and to make sure that we're at the right showcase to be a world champion of the Tri-County travel ball squad than we are to actually developing players. But we all are going to post our picture of our kids with their rings on a Sunday in their 5th travel grays with their pinstriped hat.
Right.
And you pay a hell of a lot of money, and your kid didn't get better because if they weren't playing good at third base, you went and talked to them and you moved them to second base,
Right.
despite the fact that they weren't good enough at second base. So coaches have lost that authority to say, when you walk in here, when I went to LSU, I would have never thought about challenging Coach Bertman. It was his program. I was honored to be a part of it, and I was willing to open my heart and mind. Now, what had happened if I didn't have a good experience? Well, I could blame him. I could save face. I could tell everybody around me that he had screwed me over. I could tell everybody, or I could admit that I wasn't good enough to play there. Nobody's ever going to admit that I wasn't good enough to play there. Okay. So now we have to knock down everybody. So that erodes our coaches. If coaches are listening to this, the fastest way around it is to not get mad at the system, but to be better on using the system for you. Develop and publish your philosophy to every player in your squad and every parent in your squad. Your philosophy should be multiple layers. It should be player development. It should be coaching. It should be practice. It should be recruiting. It should be how do you get players in college? How do you develop study hall? What do you do in the strength and conditioning room? How do you fundraise? And so on. And your players and coaches should know your philosophy. I played for the best college baseball coach in the history of the game. And I did a podcast this past week with Coach Mike Bianco at Ole Miss. And Mike was an assistant coach on my squad, on my teams for 3 years, and he was a former catcher there. And he said something that finally resonated. He said, our boys at LSU just didn't know how to do it. They understood the why they did it and the why it was a better decision over other things.
Right.
That's what we as coaches have to do.
Yeah, no, I love that. I want to get back to my next question will be about the why, but you mentioned that we're at a coaching crisis, and we're getting diverting a little bit away from the whole America Offline theme. But I'm kind of curious. You mentioned some of the things that we could do, but what is causing this crisis? What are some of the roots to it? Does technology potentially play a role? It seems that this may
1,000% it does. Heck yeah.
So speak to that a little bit.
It's not, we're not diverting in the sense of in the overall. Okay. Yeah. So for instance, let me give you an example. In our neighborhood, we have one of these Facebook groups, right?
Mm-hmm.
And somebody sees a car they don't like, they go on there, and all of a sudden they're like, seeing this car that looks suspicious in the neighborhood. Everybody's first mind is, oh my God, people are here to break in.
Right.
Okay. And it gets a mob mentality moving very quickly.
Right.
People share experiences and opinions based on their own experiences, but without all the information.
Right.
So when we look at technology and that connectivity, right? All of a sudden now I can sit and bash a coach almost anonymously without having to face them.
Right.
Because I can text somebody. I don't ever have to have that face-to-face meeting with a coach.
Yeah.
And coaches need to get ahead of that by having face-to-face regular meetings with their players and their parents. If you can't say it in front of them, don't say it at all.
Right.
As coaches. Okay. Yeah. So what's important is the technology is that we've become so addicted to fast communication without being fully vetted or really being accurate to the underlying opinions that are shifting it. But we want to express it. We live in a Yelp world where you go to a restaurant, you have a bad service, you feel compelled enough to get on social media and rip into it as if it's their everyday experience.
Right.
Nobody says, hey, went to so-and-so chicken restaurant and man, they must have had a bad day. Instead, they go on and say, this place is horrible. It's disgusting. The service was bad and my chicken was tough. And they're making it as a global assessment versus, my God, today may have been a bad day.
Right.
I'm willing to try it again. As long as I don't get sick, I'm willing to try it again.
Yeah.
And so that's what we do. We make these global assumptions on coaches and people, but I see it with coaches too. And I think this is what's important. How many times have you seen a player be given an opportunity again, and then written off for the rest of the year?
Right. Yep. All the time.
All the time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what did you see? I had a recruiting coordinator tell me recently, I was shocked. Yeah, I went and saw his kid. He's a freshman. He just doesn't have what it takes to play here. Mm-hmm. He's a freshman in high school. You're judging a kid freshman in high school on how he's going to play in 4 to 6 years.
Right.
Okay. His pimples are still small. Okay. He doesn't have hair on his chest yet. He doesn't know what it takes to play and get mixed up. Maybe he's going to get underneath a player who's going to show him the right way to play. Okay. But we're going to write off a kid based on some little assumption, that's some prediction. Okay. Based on a kid that we'd rather evaluate as a freshman who's shaving, right, who has gone ahead of the growth curve faster, is getting to play all the time, but is capped out. Okay. So technology, 100%. Why? Well, you know why they do that? Well, because I'm looking at everybody's highlight reels and I'm also reporting on everybody's negatives as if they're global assessments of the worst experience of their life is their everyday experience. Yeah. That's how technology has screwed us.
Yeah, no, totally. And I feel like the whole idea of like misery loves company, you allow for more of that with technology. Like you could, like you said, you could get a thread going with other parents. Immediately after the game, you saw a coach, yell at a kid. You could anonymously email or call the principal of the school. And most of the times these principals, they're going to respond, or they have to respond a lot of times. They have to respond. And so I saw that for sure that it's a lot easier for parents to sort of mobilize and band together because they heard about something, as opposed to facing it straight on or having the parent, maybe try to set a meeting
But
with.
you know what parents never see?
Mm,
Because coaches don't do this enough. And this is important. If I'm going to yell at you because I need to see you hustle, they don't ever see you come back around, not to soothe you, but they never see you come back around and interact as a normal person within seconds of it happening.
right.
Okay. One of the greatest predictors of youth growth is to be able to see your parents argue and resolve it. So parents who want to argue in another room and never let your kids, they can feel the tension, but they never see the resolution.
Right.
It doesn't mean making up. It means my wife and I can have an argument, but go to dinner and be civil with one another and then work towards a solution over the next day or so. Okay.
Right.
Well, if a coach, I get mad and I storm off because it's a power trip. Now the parent sees, whoa, that guy's unhinged, or that lady, man, she's unstable. Okay. They never see the, barking at you and demanding more out of you, and then coming back and just kind of bumping hands 30 minutes later, or 10 minutes later, and saying, by the way, great job. If you watch Hard Knocks, John Gruden is brilliant at it. He's going to rip you, and then he'll walk away, and then he'll turn back and go, by the way, great pass on that other play.
Yeah.
Okay. He's brilliant at it. That's a very strong emotional skill. And so I can give you brutal feedback, but I've got to have the foundation to be able not to soothe you. Like, I don't care if you leave upset,
Right.
but I want you to leave knowing that you can work through it.
Right.
Okay. I want to know how you're going to come back tomorrow. And some people call that safe. That's fine. You don't call it safe. I call it, more about having a foundation of trust and development that has been established at the very beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I always really, I really respect those kind of coaches who, they're kicking the trash can, they're yelling, they're all upset, but at the end of the day, and they're getting on their kids, but at the end of the day, they sit on the sidelines, they could put their arm around the kid and just kind of connect them and let them know that they really are here for them. They really care. And they're just on them because they want the best. And I think it takes sort of maybe not a master coach, but it takes a, experienced coach to be able to straddle that line in between, being, too soft, but also being, demanding enough that you're inspiring them to want to be great.
Well, and it's, the important thing too is a player has to realize that a mistake doesn't define their relationship.
Right.
Okay. And so as a coach, a player makes a mistake. You can get angry about a kid missing a ground ball or throwing it to the wrong base or not being in the right backup position. Okay. But then you have to be on the lookout for how that player works to resolve it down the road. And then you need to reinforce it. Listen, where players lose trust of coaches is when a coach tries to tell them what to do. The player does it, and the coach either doesn't, I don't say reward it, or doesn't even notice it,
right,
or creates a different criterion for them to succeed. So in other words, coach, I want to play. You're not good enough. What do I need to do? Okay, this all season, I need you in the weight room. I need you taking a lot of ground balls. I need you hitting a lot. They do that. They come back, and they get beat out again. Okay, that's fine if they understood, as you as a coach said, look, you did everything I asked you. But so did Johnny. Okay,
right.
so while you got better, you pushed Johnny. That kid will go, God, that sucks. Where can I play? Well, now you have a kid who's fighting. But if you come back and the kid's still not good enough because for some reason you don't believe that kid's very good, in your mind you got some bias, and then you say, the kid goes, what do I need to play? And you're like, well, you need to get faster. The kid just goes, why would I trust you? You just told me 5 things to do, and my goodness, now I'm going to go do that.
Right.
And I'm not going to get any clarity about what I'm going to get to play. That's the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Where you're getting at a little bit, I think a lot about what technology and the availability of information and the ability to, you see something that you want, you buy it online, it can come maybe same day. You need a response from mama. You could text you get an immediate reply, but in sports and athletics, I mean, as you know, particularly in a sport like baseball, I mean, it could take 6 months to a year to change your swing. How might the immediacy or the ability to get gratification instantaneously impact the development process for an athlete.
Well,
Do you have any thoughts on that?
yeah, I mean, look, you're exactly right. I mean, we were a microwave society in the 80s, but we're an instantaneous society now. If you want Taco Bell, they'll freaking deliver it to you. I mean, come
Right.
on.
Yep.
Okay. That's bizarre. And Amazon's trying to figure out how to do same day delivery in most cities now. I mean, that's
Right.
just shocking.
Yep.
But I use an example with my players about the weight room, and I'll tell them, I'll say, well, where do deadlifts come in handy? Where in your game do you bend over and pick up heavy things with your knees in a position in your back in that form? And players go, never. Okay. So why do we do deadlifts? Well, it's because it's good for our core strength and but where does it show up on the field? Like I lift heavy stuff today, tomorrow I feel more stable. No.
Right.
Where does a deadlift work? And doing a lot of work with golfers, but baseball is much the same way. You know, I'll tell a player, oh, so if you are consistent in your plan with your deadlifts, 4 months from now, you're going to have a hanging lie on the side hill. You've got to maintain your spine angle, and you have enough core strength to be able to swing aggressively at a ball. You don't go at that moment, oh, those deadlifts I did at 6 o'clock in the morning led me to that.
Right.
But you were able to execute. It's the same way as a baseball. If you look at let's say a pitcher, right? And the pitcher's fatiguing in the 7th inning, they're not going to remember what those deadlifts were. Okay. But you're going to be able to stay, driving through your drive leg at a much better rate than breaking down and getting wild in the zone. You're not going to immediately equate it to your deadlifts. So what I try to get players to understand is that investments take time to mature.
Right.
Fortunately, before we had fertilizer, the way that they fertilized crops was with cow manure. So during that maturation, you're going to have to push through a lot of crap in order for it to grow. And you've got to continue to be there and trust that that process that you're building is going to show up at one point. Farmers know a time that it's the crops are going to mature. They don't know the moment.
Right.
That's how we have to look at it. But unfortunately, with sports, we're not in control of the outcome like we pretty much are with growing crops.
Right.
Minus weather and rain and drought.
Mm-hmm.
We can pretty much control many of the factors. Sports, we can't.
Yeah.
I look at, great players. I mean, let's take a look at the Washington Redskins drafted Robert Griffin III and Kirk Cousins. Who would have believed that Kirk Cousins would be the biggest contract in the league and Robert Griffin III would be essentially out of the league?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Things happen. Both good guys. Neither, Robert Griffin III wasn't because he was a bad guy. He got hurt. And he had a really hard time overcoming it. Kirk Cousins blossomed and had time to mature as a backup.
Right.
Critical for his success, maybe.
Yeah. Love that. Brett, I'm also thinking about somewhat similar. It's like, how technology off the field is sort of impacting their ability on the field. Are you seeing anything, or do you have any thoughts on just the amount of time kids are spending on their phone, either just video gaming, just how many, how stimulating it is. And then also just the amount of notifications that kids are getting. Do you think that could impact an athlete's ability to get into, let's say, like a flow state on the field?
I think, I don't know. I've kind of mixed on the video game situation. And I was mixed before the guy won $3 million playing Fortnite. Okay. But my roommate in college was a kid by the name of Todd Walker. And Todd Walker is in the College Baseball Hall of Fame. He was the 8th pick in the 94 draft. Mm-hmm. Played a long time in the major leagues. Now is an ESPN analyst. And he came down with this machine that was a hand-eye and foot coordination machine. And he'd practice it in his room at night. And he was flawless at it. And we'd play Sega Genesis, and his hand-eye coordination was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Was that genetic? Maybe. His brother was a kicker and played, is an accountant. His dad wasn't anything successful as an athlete. So I think it was probably more of him buying into this skill set. So I think video games have a very big benefit. I think playing pool has a very big benefit. Mm-hmm. Playing ping pong in your locker rooms has a very big benefit. Shooting hoops has a big benefit. Playing Frisbee and stuff like that. Anything with the hands and the eyes are great. I don't think video games are bad. They're so realistic now that the mind can put itself into that moment.
Right.
Where I get in trouble is when we our attention span is being trained to be so quick and so rapid that we can't sustain it. But here's the deal as coaches, and you see coaches like Tim Corbin at Vanderbilt and other coaches like that have figured out how to use it. If you're asking your kids to come in and sit in an hour-long meeting, they're not going to do it. Okay? Kids don't watch hour and a half movies anymore unless I got something. When's the last time you watched a college football game without looking at your phone?
Right.
People wonder why college football attendance is down. It's because they can't stay on Twitter while they're watching the game. I swear that's one of the biggest factors, okay? Because the internet sucks in the things. It's just easier to watch it at home.
Right.
Kids today, everything is faster. So as a coach, you better communicate differently. Well, coaches can communicate just as easily with a text exchange.
Right.
You can be ahead of the game. You can use YouTube videos that are 10 minutes long and get an hour-long discussion out of it. But you have to utilize and see what skills that they're doing that are better than what we ever did.
Right.
And these kids believe that things are possible now because they can create them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's sort of meeting them where they are, right? And they receive information in bite-sized forms a lot of times. So that 20-minute speech before or after a game, they're gonna tune out. To the same effect though, like what are some things like an athlete can do to combat that a little bit? Because that's the way that they learn, it's all bite-sized chunks. I don't necessarily know if that makes it the best way to learn. Like I think the ability to have continuous thought and focus is a positive thing. What are some things an athlete can do in this hyper distracted society to improve their ability to stay in the moment, to focus on the process, and not get not sort of self-interrupt with other thoughts that are creeping in, feelings of self-doubt and anxiety and tension, things like that?
I think there are a couple things that we can just generally do. I think one of them is find 15 minutes a day to disconnect. Okay.
Yeah.
And this will lay the groundwork to whatever you do. Like, there's a big movement. A lot of people want to do mindfulness and meditation. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And I love mindfulness. I love meditation. But the way I meditate is a lot different than other people. A lot of times I meditate when to me, the most powerful moment is when I go to a local diner, have eggs and bacon in the morning and drink some coffee. And
Right.
I'm reading stuff and I'm just getting my thoughts together.
Yeah.
So what I kind of look at meditation is take 20 minutes or 15 minutes that's devoted to you. I love Headspace. I think Headspace is a very powerful app. Some people think it's crazy. Some people love it. Meditation and reconnection to the source is what I call it. It's just reconnecting to your source. Look at it like Baskin Robbins. There are a lot of flavors. Find the one that works for you.
Right.
Some people love to do it by reading scripture. Some people love to do it for going for a morning run. Okay, find something that connects to your source that's anti-technology. Now we say Headspace has got technology. Well, it's a delivery platform at that point. Okay,
Right.
A couple other things. I think when you go to a meeting, don't leave your phone out. Okay, but then you look at it and you go, well, I've got an iPhone watch, an Apple Watch, because now I got my notifications coming here.
Right.
You're not going to get away from it. But what you can do is say, you know what, like while we've been doing this, one of my elite clients hit me up on text and said, hey, when are we chatting? Anytime soon. Well, now it's taken him a day and a half to reach back out to me. Why is it I feel the urgency to answer him right now?
Mm-hmm.
So we need to resist that urge. Like he's not in a rush. I'm not in a rush. We're good. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So just put some space there of just like, hey, I'll get to it when I get to it. We have to train ourselves that not everything is an emergency and not everything is an urgency.
Right.
Okay. The last thing I would do is learn to go to dinner. And I think this is important as parents. It's a pet peeve of mine because I grew up in a military family where my dad believed that table manners were critical. And my mom taught manners and taught, she was a model and taught social skills. Okay. But when I go to restaurants, and my kids are 22 and 18, but I can guarantee you two things that always happened at a restaurant. My kids stayed in their seats, and they were a part of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now they may have had their phone to answer, but we would get them to put their phone up. I didn't put an iPad in front of their face and said, watch a video so that I can enjoy my dinner without you. And I think it's also terrible when our kids stand at the table and don't know how to sit in a chair.
Right.
And I see it all the time. The kids walking around the table doing circles, eating their chicken finger. And I've seen it as high as 12 and 13 years of age. What skill are we teaching them to be able to sit in a class and be taught? What skill are we
Right.
teaching them to be hired by a boss if they can't sit still?
Right.
That is simple parenting and leadership.
Yeah.
As parents and as coaches, take your teams to a dinner. And I'm coaches, your table manners matter as much as your players. I've watched way too many coaches get to a dinner and then they just shovel the food in and their head never comes up.
Right.
Like, you've got to teach them skills that they don't learn anymore. There was a coach I worked with by the name of Anthony Grant, who's a basketball coach now at the University of Dayton. Anthony's an awesome coach, awesome guy. He wouldn't eat until every player in his team had eaten. It was like leaders eat last mentality.
Simon Sinek.
Yeah. But it was more also from him of a stance of, he wanted to make sure everybody got enough to eat. He wanted to make sure everybody got everything they needed. Then he'd come in and eat. What I encouraged him to do is not wait until everybody ate and left. Sit in there and sit at the table with your guys so they got to see you from a different perspective. You could be the last in line, but eat at the same time as them.
Right.
But also show them how to, many of our kids have never been in a situation where both parents are at home during dinner. So they're eating in front of the TV and they don't know. Those are skills that will teach somebody mentally how to be present where they are. Because you're teaching them, listen, when you eat, I'm not telling you, this isn't Princess Diaries where I'm telling you what the gelato spoon is. Okay. I care less about that. But do you know the simple trick of which is your bread plate and which is your drink at a table?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you know when you chew to keep your mouth closed so that people don't see all the food you're eating, and don't talk when your mouth is full, and learn how to observe? We may not call those being in the present, but that's exactly what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Learning to immerse yourself in a scenario and having the skills to be able, because I have found that over time, and having worked in corporate, that is a big barrier. And a lot of kids have a lot of self-esteem issues when they get in those settings because they embarrass themselves.
Yeah.
That's a little bit of I'm off topic, but it's
important. No, that's good. I mean, Brett, do you think that there's parenting is not as present in terms of teaching the general life skills of what you need to thrive, and to, things like emotional intelligence and manners and things like that?
I wouldn't say that parenting is at a loss today that it was. Listen, we don't have June Cleaver at home anymore. If we look at, we're the second and third generation, maybe second generation of both parents working in the home. We have a lot more split family homes. We have a lot more merged families. We have a lot more uniqueness. Okay. We also don't really grow up in neighborhoods anymore. When I was a kid, I played baseball from sun up to sundown, played football, whatever. You'd come in when the lights turned on, or your dad.
Yeah.
Okay. But if I sent my kids outside right now and we live in a good neighborhood, I mean, am I worried they're going to make it back? Okay. And you remember when the ice cream, I don't know how old you are, but when the ice cream truck would show up, everybody would run. Today, if an ice cream truck showed up, I'd want to know who the driver was. Okay.
Right.
So, because I want to make sure that's not a pedophile driving that thing.
Right.
I've seen one too many shows on Discovery ID, but I think it's also, I think parenting is a different challenge today. Our days are much more demanding than they were 60 years ago. Now we have different issues in our country. The issues are ever changing and ever expanding, and there are different stressors. Okay. This generation that we're talking about that was born, my daughter's was born in 2001. She's never been in an environment where we haven't been at war. She just went to college as a freshman. They've never really been in a world without hyperconnectivity. So parenting has to evolve. Right. It's not that parenting is better or worse. You can be a great parent and be on the road 5 days a week for a job. Okay. I've seen numerous parents, when they're home, they're home. That doesn't mean the dad can't go play golf or watch a football game, but you're interested. I can have a better dialogue with my daughter who's a freshman in college by sending her a text GIF than I can asking her to give me a rundown of her day.
Right.
So
but maybe it's a great response. Maybe a related question is, you mentioned something that's like a big pet peeve of my wife and I, because we have a 2-year-old, right? And we're very, we love technology, right? But we're anti-screens for, a 1 or a 2-year-old, or even a 3, 4, 5-year-old. But as you mentioned, we'll go to the local restaurant, whatever. And we see it's hard to find parents out with their kids. It's hard to find parents that are out with their kids and that they're not putting their kids on devices. It's almost like that's what everybody does. And it's
Yeah.
scary. What do you think? I mean, obviously awareness is a big thing, but like, what do you think it's going to take for society to wake up to the fact that this isn't the right way to do the right way to do things? Their developing brains are,
but they're developing to read a lot earlier too.
mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know if they really teach reading in kindergarten anymore, because most of the kids who show up in kindergarten know how to read.
Right.
The old days for us was you wake up in the morning, you watch Saturday cartoons, and you left. There wasn't a cartoon station.
Right.
Okay. And my God, if you missed the Looney Tune Olympics, I can't remember the show I used to love to watch. You didn't get to see it until next week.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But I'm not judging parents either. I am one, and I've raised 2 kids that are off to college, but it's not easy, and we're tired. All right. Why? Well, in the old days, way back when, you got home at 5:30, you had a drink, you had dinner, and you sit down in the living room, and there may be a show on, and you sit around the TV and you watch it, and then everybody went to the room and you went to bed at 9:30 or 10. You didn't have emails. You didn't have, like, right now, if you go home, like if you go on vacation and I tell you, don't check work email. How do you do that?
Right.
It's on your phone.
Mm-hmm.
So you take it off. Well, then it's like, I got to see what's there, because when I go back to work, I want to make sure I don't have a bomb there that I got to deal with.
Right.
So we're constantly connected, but there is a benefit to the kids in that, you give a kid a device at 2, they know how to use an iPad. It's shocking how they can find videos. That's a skill. Okay. That's a learnable skill. Now we got to help them understand, listen, today when we go to dinner, we're not going to take devices. But then that means the parents have to talk to the kids.
Right.
Okay. You got to engage them. You can't just be like, hey, look, we're going to go to Ruth's Chris and you're going to sit there quietly. That sucks for everybody involved.
Right.
Okay. But if you're going to go to a Chick-fil-A and you're going to have dinner, well, of course they're going to see the playground, and you're going to tell them no devices. They're going to want to go to the play. Listen, here's what we're going to do. We're going to eat, and then you can go play. Then let them have time to play in the playground.
Yeah.
Then you can get on your device. I mean, but let them play. Like you gotta give them those opportunities. Kids, they're so connected.
Yeah.
They don't know how to fix something. They're on YouTube. Okay. That's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But do it with them. Be a part of their lives like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking about, like, I've been doing some work with local schools, and a lot of them, like, I go in there like, well, Dave, what you're proposing sounds great, but we're 1-to-1 iPad. I'm like, it's almost like they're bragging about it, right? And I get it. It's a great, it could be a great teaching tool. But I was thinking, like, man, how cool would it be if it was like 2-to-1 iPad? How about the kids like work together on their iPad, so they actually have to communicate and work with another person instead of everybody in their individual silo? And I think it could be the same thing for parents potentially, where the parent and the child kind of locks in. Maybe they play the video game together. Maybe they watch the show together. Yeah. Play the game together, but that can increase connection as opposed to everyone sort of off doing their own things.
I remember my dad was, he was in his 30s when he had me, but he was also at the age where we didn't play video games. And every once in a while I'd get him to come in and play a video game. But I always, like, looking at that now, if I had sons, I'd play video games with my kids.
Right.
I have daughters that care less about video games.
Yeah.
But, as a dad, I'll go dress shopping with them.
Yep.
Okay. My wife's like, why do you want to come? I'm like, because I want to spend time with them.
Right.
Now, they both played golf, and I'd go do that and help them out with that. But go do those things.
Yeah.
And as parents, it's in the youth sports stuff, go to a game and see them tell the coach, great job today, in a loss. Way to work at that.
Right.
Okay. Not, let's get out of this. Coach is a bumbling idiot. Communicate with them in different ways. Listen, you can walk up to your kid and literally put your arm around him and hug on him and don't have to say a word, and that kid knows what you're talking about.
Right.
Okay. Technology is also powerful in the sense of, when my oldest daughter was playing golf, she'd always look over to me on the outside of the ropes. There weren't ropes there, but you get my point. And she'd always like, what's the matter? And I'm like, nothing. Until I realized that she was reading facial or perceiving my facial expressions. And what I found was, if I listened to my iPod or a podcast on my phone with my earphones. And I chewed sunflower seeds. I didn't show any behavior. I didn't show anything. And it's interesting because the technology there saved me. I don't know if you've ever been to a golf tournament for juniors. It's extremely long, 6.5-hour rounds.
Right.
Okay. So I'd listen to podcasts, or I'd listen to music or whatever. And I allowed my mind. And so there are ways. Listen, the other things about technology, my God, you can film every game. Everybody can watch.
Mm-hmm.
You can see things. Go back and watch them afterwards with the kids.
Yeah.
Make
Totally.
highlight films of them.
Yeah.
You're going to embarrass the hell out of them. But that's cool.
What do you do like when the kid takes it too far, or he doesn't know how to self-moderate, self-manage? He's playing the Fortnite till 2:00 in the morning. A lot of parents, and it's not their fault, they just don't know any other way. And there's only a limited number of resources out there. But most of the stuff that I'm seeing is all restriction based. Hey, create restrictions. Brett, what's it going to take to create a society or a culture where kids sort of know their limits a little bit and are able to self-moderate and self-manage, so that, hey, all right, I've played my hour or two for the day, it's time to get a good night's rest. What's it going to take to shift it from, do you think the restrictions?
The human brain with outside influences is not really good at self-moderation and modulating. Okay, that's why we get into drug issues, okay? Mm-hmm. Because people don't know that one is good, okay?
Right.
Not I'm saying any drug is good, but you get my point, okay?
Right.
And so Fortnite, those games, they're also, listen, it's just why are certain TV shows, they understand what moves kids to grab their attention.
Totally.
Okay. So they are doing their job. They know with Fortnite, with below average graphics, it has I've never played it, but I've seen it. It's not Call of Duty level graphics. It's almost comical, but it's bright lights. It's distracting as hell.
Colorful,
it's colorful, but it grabs their attention. Okay.
Right.
That's not by accident.
Oh,
they may have fallen into it, but they're maximizing it. Okay. What is it going to take for us to self-modulate? Yeah, I don't think that's ever going to happen. So I think as a parent, what we have to do is realize that when a person moves beyond their realm and their areas of norm, okay, they go into starting to have impairment. It was interesting when I saw the interview with the parents whose kid won the $3 million Fortnite thing. He said, well, I practice 6 to 8 hours a day and I come home, and they're like, well, yeah, but his grades never altered. And I was like, okay, that's great, but how are his social relationships?
Right.
Okay. Now he may have relationships with people who are anonymous across the world playing on his game, but can he go out and have a conversation and order food from Panera Bread?
Right.
Or can he take back something that is not good at Walmart and not be embarrassed?
Right.
Okay. Those are skills. Okay. So when somebody is playing Fortnite all the time, they don't know how to do it because they just hit reset or they respawn or whatever. So as a parent, this is what parenting ultimately is, having conversations. Look, I'm concerned about the amount of time you're playing Fortnite. I'm not going to tell you can't play it. I'm not going to tell you that anything. What I'm telling you is we gotta cut it back a little bit. But at the same time, what happens if they don't? Well, then you start establishing further ground rules. And sometimes those are restrictions. But you also have to look at your kid to find out why they're so addicted to something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm using the word addiction as if it's clinical. It's not. I'm speaking as a parent. If they are in the thing where they're throwing an absolute conniption fit when you're asking them to come down to dinner because they got to get off Fortnite, then you got to establish some boundaries and some rules to say what is acceptable and what is not.
Right.
Okay. You tell them, listen, we're going to have dinner in 30 minutes. So wrap up what you're doing. They have to make that decision. Do I do it or do I not?
Right.
But, I want you to just take a look at it and see where it continues to go.
Yeah. So Brett, we're coming up on time here, but I kind of want to just open it up for a second and sort of give you the opportunity to just kind of talk about, like, maybe what are some of your, your core philosophies, or maybe what of your, maybe just some closing remarks on like what you think society as a whole, parents, coaches, teachers, what are some of the things that we could be thinking about or doing on a regular basis to make an impact? I know you gave some of sort of like the micro things, but maybe as a society as a whole, like what are some things that you think need to happen for us to develop some more mindful strategies for using technology?
Well, I think ultimately technology is an amazing tool. All right. And you got to understand the intention of the tool and the investment of the tool in order to make an impact in your life.
Right.
If you lose in anything you do, the investment and the intention, then you're going to open yourself up to be swayed or to be, have a negative outcome. I think the other thing too is, where do we get our value? If we get our value from what other people value of us, then we're always in trouble. But I'm not naive to think that somebody telling us great job or you did a great job and that doesn't feel good. Of course it does. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But where we have to be really aware of is what are we doing to invest in ourselves on a daily basis so that we can be intentional? What's our intentions? What's our intentions when we put ourselves in situations? If our investment is of the right mindset and our intentions have the right purpose, more times than not, we'll put ourselves in a better scenario. Technology is a tool that allows us to connect to people across the world, to learn things in a faster way, and to be quicker. Don't see it as the enemy. See it as a tool to help you achieve the goals that you want on the timeline that sometimes is out of our control, but that can be pressed a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I love it. Yeah, it is a tool. It's a tool that you should be using. It shouldn't be a tool that tech companies are using to sell you. And it just comes down to being just a little bit more intentional and mindful.
Whether they're selling us or not. I mean, people always get so freaked out about Facebook. We're talking about, if we were talking about Cheetos right now, how soon until Cheetos ads pop up on my phone? Okay.
Right.
Or whatever. But the reality is, as a psychologist, that's brilliant.
Right.
Okay. Because I'm cueing you. I'm taking the cues that you're giving me. I'm priming your cues, and then I'm converting on those primes.
Right.
That's brilliance. Okay. But we need to be aware to not get mad at that, but to use those as reminders to be invested in ourselves, not as being frustrated when we see it. Use it as a reminder to reinvest in ourselves.
Yeah. Love that. Well, Brett, I want to thank you so much for donating your time today and connecting about these topics. I think it's going to make for a great episode. And where can people find a little bit more about you and everything that you're up to?
Yeah, you can go to brettmccabe.com. That's BHRETTMCCABE.com. And then through there, you can find all our social media and the podcasts that we do and all the other factors. So brettmccabe.com will get you where you need to go.
Cool. And we'll make sure to link it in the show notes as well. And once again, Brett, thank you so much for opening it up to us on this important topic. Definitely learned a lot today, and looking forward to hopefully staying in touch with you.
You got it, my man. Thank you so much.
All right. Sounds good. Take care.